morning. Assalamu alaikum. How are you today? Are you happy today? I'm happy to see all these wonderful people coming from all over the world. We have a great gathering today of distinguished professionals from different countries, representing many different countries. So I was saying, my name is Majid Muhtasib. I'm an advisor here at the Securities and Commodities Authority, and I would like to welcome you to your home either for 2 or 4 days, depending on what side of the industry you are, okay? I have quite a few things to cover. That's why I brought my notes, okay? First of all, I would like to give you a little bit of background as to how this event came about, okay? I had the pleasure of joining SCA about 2 years ago, and like many securities markets regulatory agencies, SCA has signed many MOUs with many counterparts all over the world, okay? And I, having come from the United States, I asked, does SCA have an MOU with the SEC? They told me that SCA does not sign any MOUs with the SEC. We have 3 wonderful professionals from the SEC that I will introduce later on. So I accepted the answer, but I was not comfortable with it. How come, we can't have an MOU with the SEC? There must be something that we could do with the SEC. And then I looked into it and found out that the SEC is willing to collaborate with us, okay, in many different ways, including running a world-class regional training program. And this was about a year ago, okay? Once I found out about the good news, I went to His Excellency Dr. Abeid, and I shared the good news with him, and the rest is history. He gave his blessing, and I'm very thankful for his approval and support that was never wavering for this project. So this is a little bit of background as to how this came about. It's just a lot of work. It took a lot of work, a lot of effort from the SEC as well as SCA to put this together. I want to emphasize this was a collaboration from many sections at SCA here. People from research and financial analysis, from the head of training. Where's Yusuf? Yusuf, thank you very much for your kind support. Yusuf will have excellent support. He and I, we had, and many others. People from the media, the IT, have all collaborated together to make this happen, and for all of you here. I would like to thank all of my colleagues who have made this program a success. Hopefully it will be, you will testify to that on Wednesday by the end of the program. Okay. I expect it to be a very I expect the program to be a very productive and very rewarding program for all of us. Now here's one thing that I would like to ask you. You can think of this as a favor or maybe assignment if you want. There is about 100 of us today here. I'll give you my email. What I will ask you is, there it is. This is my email. What I would like to ask you is, over the next 2 or 4 days, okay, there must be one lesson or idea or concept that you can say, I'm going to take this home with me and actually apply it. Something that I can directly benefit from. Send that to me in an email. What I will do is collect all those wonderful ideas from you, okay, and then share them with all of you. You can think about, 50 to 100 wonderful ideas that we can all benefit from each other. Okay? So we learn from the SEC staff as well as learn from each other, and add the value, okay, of the program to all of us. So please do that, and I promise that I will collect those ideas and send them and share them with all of you. Okay. Now, in terms of the attendees, we need to clarify a couple of things about, who should be here the first 2 days and who should be here in the entire program. We have some rules that we have to comply with. The SEC and SCA are very keen on, obviously, spreading knowledge, enhancing the benefit of the program to as many people as possible. So we thought we want to have some dialogue with the industry. We regulators should not be talking to regulators only. We should be talking to regulators as well as practitioners from the industry. So we thought we open up the program for the first day and a half. So our friends and colleagues from the securities industry, okay, are welcome to stay with us all of today and tomorrow through lunch, and including lunch. Okay? So I want to make sure that we are all aware of that. And if you have any questions at any time, please let us know about this issue. The program, okay. Normally we start about 9 o'clock every day. So we kindly request that you allow 15 to 30 minutes. Something very exciting for all of us. Many of us worked on this program very hard.
We've run into challenges. We've been able to overcome those challenges. Regrettably, one of our friends from the SEC could not make it. Okay, we were scheduled to have 4 distinguished professionals from the SEC deliver the program to us. One of them could not get the visa on time. So here, what we're going to do, for his part, we will have either videos, okay, videos, or on days 3 and 4, we'll have videos and video conference. So we ask for your patience and support. We really try very hard to make this a success, okay? We try to remove any challenges that we run into. We are 3 or 4 of us working, like Yusuf working, and Erin, we were working on this over the weekend. People were here trying to make sure, people were here yesterday to make sure that the equipment is working. So if something goes wrong, just be patient with us. And then we'll take the first break. Dr. Abed Zaabi, if I may, okay, is Acting Chief Executive Officer, the Securities and Commodities Authority, has over 25 years of work experience that spans financial regulation, accounting, banking, finance and investment, and Sharia compliant finance at many leading financial institutions in the UAE. These institutions include the Central Bank, Dubai Islamic Bank, Amlak, Finance, and most notably, and very fortunately for us, the Securities and Commodities Authority. Dr. Abeid has a PhD in Finance and Banking from the Durham University in the United Kingdom, and he is a full member of the Australian-based Institute Certified Management Accountant. His experience is very extensive. He's a member of many professional organizations, and we are very delighted to have him with us today. Thank you, Dr. Abeid. You may start.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and very good morning today. Thanks for the Dr. Majid for the introductions. Would like to just welcome the team from SEC here. What I have Dalia and Matthew and also Erin. I don't have your business card, Erin, unfortunately. Anyhow, very good morning. I don't have a speech today because I leave the fruitful to the presentations. Could be good for us, all of us, and I'm sure we're going to benefit from the contents of this program. What I'm going to focus is on the as introductions to the SCA, Securities and Commodity Authority. It's a federal regulator, regulate 3 main markets, 2 in Dubai and 1 in Abu Dhabi. In Dubai, we have DFM, Dubai Financial Markets, and ADGX, it's a commodity exchange. Then we have EDX, Abu Dhabi Financial Markets, mainly for security and bonds, sukuk. We have around 49 brokers. We have registered with us. We have around 128 listed companies in both markets, DFM and EDX. We have a soft regulations on the ADGX because most of their transactions with the commodity futures contract. And nowadays we are introducing too many regulations in the pipeline. We've started already with the funds, corporate governance. By the way, we have raised the bar for the women participations in the board. We make it 20% obligatory, and that's the big shot, I think, for the female here. Anyhow, we are working on regulating the secondary markets, the primary markets as well. We have introduced the IBO process. We are working on merger and acquisitions as well. Also, we are working with IASCO in terms of strengthening the multilateral MOUs We have already gained, the full membership with IOSCO in 2013. And we are working closely also with GCC. We have too many regulation pipeline. It's not obligatory. It's optionally right now, but hopefully we can get it mandatory in 2 years term. This is, the most developments have been here with us. We've been, upgraded to emerging market by the Morgan Stanley MSCI index recently in 2014, and we are working with them closely also to upgrade, the markets to being developed, and hopefully we can achieve this within, the strategy of United Arab Emirates main strategic plan, which is cover 2020. In a way of, concluding my speech, I hope all of us to benefit from, the team of SEC who came from long way from United States here to deliver, their experience in a wide spectrum subject, including enforcements, supervisions, investigations. So please pair your minds with the instructors. Give, the subject the importance it deserves, so we can benefit from the experience, the contents, the discussions. And feel free, maybe Dr. Majid, give you the facility to use, the ground floor. I give you the facility to use, the ground, first and second floor. So feel free to go anywhere here, from ground to second floor. And I believe, I'll go into benefits. I'm seeing, faces from too many jurisdictions here. Maybe GCC and maybe from Arab, Middle East. So, and don't hesitate to ask any questions for the instructors, Dr. Majid here, and the guys who, provide logistics. And either myself, you can contact me directly. So thank you very much for coming, and hopefully you're going to enjoy and benefit from this course. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Abed, for the welcoming remarks. And I would like to recognize and thank our guests from the SEC. If Dr. Abed, if you would join me on the stage, and Ali, or my good friend Ali. We're very delighted and very thankful for the SEC to have sent us 3 distinguished professionals to share their experience and knowledge with us. I know I'm looking forward to learn from them, and I'm sure you will too. The first, Yusuf, what are the, okay. If you would, Matthew and Dahlia and Aaron, if you would be so kind. First of all, I'd like to give you the award for the SEC. Very nice, very beautiful palm tree from the UAE.
Thank you. Stand in the middle, if you don't mind.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for having us, and I'm so glad to see so many faces. My name is Erin McCartney. I work in the Office of International Affairs. I'm Senior Special Counsel. I'm responsible for technical assistance as well as international FCPA enforcement. And we'll talk a little bit more about my colleagues when they come up and give their presentations, but we're so glad to be here. And we do apologize. One of our colleagues could not make it, unfortunately, due to issues with the visa. But we're hoping to have him both remotely and then also later in the week, hopefully, to be able to answer questions. But in the meantime, we're all here for you. If you have questions, we're happy to answer them. If you need to raise your hand, or we can talk to you during the breaks. We're very happy to be at your disposal. And if we can't answer any of the questions, we'll be able to come back to you with an answer. We do a lot of these programs, both internationally in the regions as well as in Washington, D.C. We have several institutes every year where we have our foreign counterparts come from all over the world to talk about issues in securities regulation, investigations, inspections, supervision, and all sorts of issues and areas. And we really like to have this because we consider it one, a dialogue with our counterparts. We can all learn from each other very much as to how to regulate, how to think about regulation, how to improve. And also the SEC, we're over 80 years old. We've been around since 1934, and while we have a lot of experience, we also have a lot of mistakes that we've made in the past. And so we hope that maybe jurisdictions can learn from those mistakes. We tried a lot of different things in our markets, and it's been building over time. It's taken over 80 years to get to where we are, and we still have things to think about, issues to change, and things to do in our market. And so we love having the interaction with international counterparts and the industry to make sure that we're taking into consideration other areas, other ideas, other things to look at. And so this is why we love doing these types of presentations. We love to have these types of interactions. And so I'm going to pause here for a second, and you're going to note that there's a disclaimer here. It says the Securities and Exchange Commission, as a matter of policy, disclaims responsibility for any private publication statement by any of its employees. So the talks that we're going to give here are our views, our thoughts. They don't necessarily represent the Commission or its other staff. And that's because for the SEC, our commission is made up of a chair and 4 other commissioners, and they speak for the SEC by vote. And so no one else can sort of take that power from them. They are our representatives. And so as a matter of policy, that's how the commission speaks. So we have a lot of historical knowledge, precedent, investigations, practice, tools, and techniques that we'd like to talk with you about today and this week. So thinking about just capital markets generally, and, as I said, the SEC has over 80 years worth of experience. A lot of it was based on our history. Even before the SEC was around, we had a vibrant capital market that was somewhat unregulated. And so a lot of our regulations and the way our capital market is built is based on that history. And so we don't necessarily think other jurisdictions need to follow exactly what we've done. We're here to talk to you about what we've done in the past and what we're doing and how we're looking at the future, just so that maybe you can learn from us and learn from how we've done things in the past, whether there are things that we think are a better way of doing things, or how your market can develop and hopefully jump over ours, learn from our mistakes and incorporate those into your market. And so that's sort of the issues that we're going to be talking about. My office feels really strongly about the development of capital markets. We think it's really important to be able to grow economies, and that's because we have so many people on this planet. There's about 7 billion. We're likely headed to 8.9 in the future. And about half of them live in poverty and less than $2.50 a day. And so that means that we have a lot of schools to build and jobs to create and power plants to build, and sort of lots of different ways to get capital to companies so that they can innovate, they can change the way we do business, change our lives for the better, and feed people and house people and clothe people. So we feel like the securities markets are a driver of economic growth. Now, there is always this yin and yang in an economy. There's bank lending and bank-focused economies, and then there's the securities market. But the problem is bank lending alone can't necessarily meet all capital needs. Banks tend to be very risk adverse, so if they're looking to give loans to companies or loans to businesses to build, they want to be very conservative with who they're giving their money to. They want to make sure that they get their money back, that they're getting an efficient return for the risk that they're taking. And so many times they're also not transparent in their operations. Generally, if you're a bank depositor and you give your money to a bank, you don't actually know who they're lending out their money to, right? You don't know who is getting their loans, how they're managing their loans necessarily. And bank regulators, for the most part, are focused on safety and soundness of the deposits, not necessarily the growth of the economy through lending, but more to make sure that there aren't runs on the banks, that the money is secure, that there is proper capital. And so many times, the banks tend to only give to a small portion of businesses or small portion of businesses that they think are safe or sound or meet certain requirements that the bank regulators set up. The advantage of the capital market is increased liquidity. So you have, if an investor can actually invest in a project but at some point pull their money out if they need it, if they need to buy a house, if their kids need to go to college, if they need it for some other reason, investors will feel more safe investing if that at some point they can pull their money out and it's not locked up for 5, 10, 15 years. Risk diversification. So it also, investors' needs can vary widely. Some of them want very safe, sound investments and are willing to take lower returns on investment. Others are looking for growth and being able to hopefully fund in the US their retirement and houses and or college kids going to college. And so we want to have a diversified portfolio that meets not only their needs for risk, but their long-term goals. Information dissemination. So securities markets, if they operate efficiently, actually disseminate information better across the market than traditional bank lending does. Because when banks are giving loans and the businesses are filling out lots of information about their business, it's just going to the bank. It's not going to shareholders or other people that are sort of looking at and trying to decide if they want to invest their money. Corporate governance is also improved through transparency and disclosure. And there are many incentives for companies who have shareholders who have dispersed shareholding, people holding their stock, to improve corporate governance and improve the way that they manage other people's money. There's also long-term capital. So it actually makes projects that businesses want to invest in much more available to them, because businesses don't actually want to invest in long-term businesses unless the return that they're going to get on their money makes them a profit. Lower cost of capital. So if a market runs efficiently, it may be much less cost of capital to access the equity markets than it would be to go for bank lending. There's a reduced rate of or risk of credit crunches. So there's more liquidity in the market if the bank lending actually dries up and the banks are concerned about lending. Hopefully the securities market can step in and add to additional capital available to companies. And the securities markets allocate capital to productive investments. So there's much more wide range of products that people may be able to invest in. They may be able to invest in projects that really may not be interesting to the banks or safe to the banks. So we have a lot of different tech companies that were started in garages by a couple of guys. You know, banks aren't necessarily going to loan money to those companies. So it produces innovation, it enhances innovation. And this is just so this is sort of the securities market oversight in the US. And again, as I sort of said, it's somewhat a happenstance from history. So we have all our securities firms down here, which we consider sort of the first level is the compliance officers, right? They're the first level of oversight. They're the first ones to try and make sure that our industry is doing the right thing, that there are issues they're being taken care of on the firm level. And so we have, this one sort of shows the broker-dealers and investment advisors, which is over 15,000. And we have compliance officers at every institution. There's compliance programs, anti-money laundering requirements. The next step is our self-regulatory organization, which is FINRA. And when I say happenstance of history, when the SEC came along in 1934, our industry already had a large history of being self-regulatory. And so Congress didn't necessarily want to do away with that, so they still had the self-regulatory components. And so throughout history, it was the security exchanges, and then it sort of merged. It was NASD. FINRA now is the new sort of broker-dealer self-regulatory organization. And they do examinations and they do disciplinary actions. So you can see, in 2015, FINRA, for just broker-dealers, there were over 4,000 examinations. For the SEC, for both broker-dealers and investment advisors, there are almost 2,000 examinations. So together, that's like 6,000 examinations. Then we go, so these are, again, the things to take care of some of the issues, to double check things that are going on, to make sure that the industry is taking care of their obligations. Then we get to enforcement actions. And so FINRA in 2015 brought over 1,500 enforcement actions. The SEC brought over 800 actions. And then the very top of the pyramid is criminal cases. And there's only 135 of those, which is a good amount of money, a good amount of numbers. But considering the SEC had 800 actions, you can see it's a much smaller piece of the oversight puzzle for us. Another issue that we found, both in the US and internationally, is making sure that you have a recourse to effective judiciary. So you want to make sure that there's a resolution of issues that somewhat isn't tying up capital, isn't tying up issues. You want to make sure that there's an ability to have a overseer, some trial procedure, be able to grant emergency actions. And so it's important to be able that you have a court that's accessible, that understands securities laws issues, because you don't want to have unresolved issues for a long period of time. So for the SEC, we have both civil court and we have an administrative law judges.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. We are very appreciative of the invitation and also the opportunity to share with you our regulatory regime. For the sake of full disclosure, yes, I speak Arabic. It's been a bit of a while since I've spoken it. I'm originally from Egypt, but I left many years ago. Let's not talk about how many. But I do speak Arabic. But I will be presenting in English because I have been a lawyer, a federal securities lawyer for over 17 years. I've had the privilege of practicing law, federal securities law, under all 4 statutes, main statutes that we administer at the SEC. And for the past 10 years, I've actually been at the commission where I have worked exclusively on the laws for investment advisors and investment companies. I work in one of 3 divisions. I mentioned 3 regulatory divisions in the SEC. That means that we are the divisions that write the rules. We are the divisions that provide guidance, as in what do those rules mean. We answer calls from investors, from the industry, from lawyers, from anybody who wants to call us. We have public lines, and we answer those calls. And we provide no action. Essentially what that means is you're trying to do something, you're not really sure whether it might violate the law, maybe, kind of in a gray area, but you come and explain to us and we tell you, well, if you do this and you make sure that you have X, Y, and Z, you'll be okay. We will not recommend to the enforcement division that they bring an action against you. All that work, we regulate the entire asset management industry, which is huge. To give you an idea, and I think I have a slide in that later, the entire industry is just under $70 trillion. It's a massive industry. And we are less than 200 attorneys and accountants and analysts in my division that we regulate that entire industry. So let's begin with, this is going to be an overview. I'm going to give you an overview of both the regulatory regime for advisors and the regulatory regime for the companies, the type of companies that these advisors regulate. Same disclaimer you're going to see in every single one of our presentations. I won't read it, but anything I say today is solely my opinion. Just put it that way. Let's first, so that the presentation kind of flows and makes sense, let me briefly go over the terms that we use in the asset management industry in the United States. Investment company or fund, if you're more familiar with the European term, UCITS. These are the pooled vehicles where me, my colleagues, we all put our money into it, and those pooled vehicles, they go and invest in oil companies, pharmaceutical companies, technological companies, whatever kind of companies. There are different types. We don't just have one type. It's a very developed regulatory regime and industry, and we have different types. The most common is called the open-end investment company or mutual fund. That is the most common type of fund. That is the heart of the asset management industry. That is the heart of the retirement savings, is the open-end company, and I will go through a little bit more later. Exchange-traded fund, I have a second slide on it, on that one, so I won't cover it too much right now, but it really is, if I have to spend, I spend about 50% of my working life on ETF, so I'll give you an overview of those. Closed-end companies, those are a special type of companies. They are listed and traded on exchanges, and they have different regulatory requirements than an open-end fund. Unit investment trusts, these are types of investment companies that from the inception, from when they are started, they have a fixed portfolio that cannot change. And they only last for a certain period of time. They can, by the way, that time can be a very, very long time. It can be 100 years and renewable. And they have no management. They don't have an advisor. They don't have a board of directors. They just have a trustee. If any of you have heard of spiders, anybody know spiders? Spiders, believe it or not, is a unit investment trust. Spiders is by volume the most actively traded security in the United States markets. It's massive. And one thing that's not on the list, but is huge, are all the different kinds of private funds that we have. These are funds, essentially, in a nutshell, there are some complications, but in a nutshell, those are funds that are not sold to retail investors. They're sold to institutional investors, essentially companies or people that have sophistication because they're very wealthy and educated, but they're not sold to retail investors. Who manages all these different kind of companies? It's called an investment advisor. And those include the people and the firm, that you work for a firm, that they provide advice to all these entities, to the private funds, to individuals. I can go and hire, personally, a financial advisor to manage my assets. And one thing that's may be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction is that in the United States, an investment advisor is both someone who has discretion over an account and someone who does not have discretion. And what that means is someone who, I have $100,000 in my account, I go and hire this investment advisor and I say, here's my money, manage it for me. Whatever, I trust you, hopefully, and you go and do whatever it is, I just want return profit on my money. You have complete discretion. Non-discretion means I want to make sure that all the decisions come through me. But whether it's discretionary or non-discretionary, that person is still an investment advisor that's regulated by us. Exchange-traded funds, ETFs, I don't know how many jurisdictions here have this. Those are the newest form of investment companies that we have. The very, very first ETF was the SPDR ETF. And that one was approved by the Commission in 1992. Since then, the assets for ETFs have really developed tremendously, and they're continuing to grow. They are, spiders aside, they are generally open-end investment companies. So they are required to abide by the regulatory regime, comply with the regulatory regime for the open-end funds, but because they really can't, because they're exchange traded, every single sponsor that wants to have an exchange traded fund has to come to my office and ask for relief. And we have to give them relief to be able to operate and sell on the market. What makes them special? Unlike a mutual fund, so if I want to buy shares of the Vanguard S&P 500 fund, I go on the Vanguard website or I go to a broker-dealer. I give them whatever money I have, $100, and I tell them, give me whatever, shares equivalent to $100. And they do that. I can't do that with an ETF. ETFs sell a minimum of 25,000 shares. And they do not sell to retail investors. They do not sell to a person. They sell solely to entities that are called authorized participants, and in a nutshell, those are broker-dealers. So if you want to transact directly with an exchange-traded fund in the United States, you have to be a registered broker-dealer, and you have to have the ability to transact, to buy and sell in these huge blocks, which we call creation units. You can review compensation agreements between the advisor and broker-dealers, clearing brokers, other transfer agents, other entities. You can prohibit sales competitions based on particular products. Again, that goes to incentive compensation. You can review communications, emails, for example, related to any types of securities to make sure there's an internal control monitoring function. And you can ban the offering of products that you feel could create conflicts for your firm. You should have proper procedures to monitor, if you're a broker-dealer or an advisor, to monitor how fees are calculated and implemented. When you're setting up a new account for a client, that client should know exactly how the fees are being calculated and deducted from their account. It should not be a surprise. And you should have, obviously, procedures to verify that all this is being done right and done fairly across the board. Valuation of assets, that's a big deal. That goes to one of the risks I had talked about earlier. If assets are not valued right, then people who are buying and selling are losing, potentially. So prices have to be accurate, and the procedure for getting accurate prices has to be monitored and verified. Pricing sources. This is a really big one. When we had the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, a lot of pricing sources walked away from pricing. And that created a problem because they were unsure of the pricing. Very recently, to give you an even more recent example that was really interesting, and you may have heard about it, one of the entities that calculates pricing for mutual funds, BNY Mellon, its computer system failed. And then the backup to that computer system also failed. So they were responsible for calculating the net asset value for a whole bunch of funds and exchange-traded funds, and they were unable to do so. And it took them, I think, about a week to get their systems back up. So those funds, because they had no backup to BNY Mellon, had some issues with the pricing. Exceptions always happen to pricing. Sometimes you can get pricing feeds from two different pricing sources, and they may not align. Exception reports are important in this place. And then if you look at the rest of the stuff, it's all about monitoring, checklists, written. Everything has to be documented. Self-assessments, any entity that is responsible for the assets of a client has to have some kind of self-assessments, self-monitoring, so that any issues are immediately noticed and addressed. And that goes, it goes through for manually priced securities, you get prices from independent pricing agencies, and IDC, for example, is one. And you really have to check the source. It's very important for any entity that relies on another entity for pricing to make sure they understand how that price is being calculated. Portfolio managers can sometimes step in and actually they do the valuation for the assets when market price, for example, is not available. In the case of a mutual fund and investment company, the board is the one that has to set policies and procedures, and all PMs would have to follow that. And then again, if there are any compliance personnel, they are responsible for making sure these valuations are being done right, being complied with, any overrides make sense, and that it's documented, obviously written and documented. That's the basic of conflicts of interest. It's a pretty convoluted topic, but it really shows that the heart of the financial services industry is based on a paradigm of conflicts, and it's important to recognize it and address it. And it's also important to recognize fundamentally that you're not going to eliminate it. So you have to mitigate it, address it, use disclosure, use all these tools, but you're not going to eliminate it. Any questions?
Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today about developing and managing an effective compliance program. My name is Pete Driscoll, and I'm the Chief Risk and Strategy Officer for the Office of Compliance, Inspections, and Examinations for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Before I begin and get into the substance of the discussion, I'd like to read a disclaimer that we typically read before any public speaking event. The Securities and Exchange Commission, as a matter of policy, disclaims responsibility for any private publication or statement. The views expressed herein are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or of the author's colleagues upon the staff of the Commission. Great. Well, before I begin, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of developing and managing an effective compliance program. Obviously, it's important to the investing public to have a strong, important to the integrity of our financial system and the investing public. And finally, it's important to the financial reputation of the reputation of financial firms. This impacts the firm's businesses, your businesses. Today, I will provide a compliance overview of what we see from a legal and best practices standpoint. Before I begin, I just want to give a brief overview of what the Office of Compliance, Inspections, and Examinations does. OC is what we refer to it. It has 5 main inspection programs within it. The largest is the investment advisor and investment company, which is mutual funds and ETFs. That program represents about half of our staff. The second largest program is our broker-dealer program, where we go out and examine broker-dealers. The third largest group is our market oversight group, which is primarily responsible for monitoring as well as examining the exchanges and self-regulatory organizations such as FINRA, the MSRB, the PCAOB, and others. And then finally, we have 2 smaller programs. One is our clearing program, which is responsible for, examining and reviewing the controls of the systemically important largest clearing firms, frankly, in the U.S., but also the world. And then finally, we have a technologies control program, which is a newer program to OC, as well as the SEC, which primarily focuses on cyber-related and computer-driven technology controls that are at some of our systemically important clearing firms as well as the exchanges. And that team is a team of IT auditors as well as cyber experts that go out and do exams in those spaces as well. And so, with that, I want to begin with a compliance overview, and you will see that a lot of it, will focus primarily on broker-dealer programs as well as investment advisors and investment company. I think you'll find that it's more heavy in the investment advisor and investment company area because that's where the bulk of the registrant population exists. From an SEC perspective, we have over 12,000 registered investment advisors, while there's only around 4,200 registered broker-dealers. And then we're also responsible on the investment advisor and investment company side with over 10,000 mutual funds as well as over 20,000 private funds. So you'll find me focused a little bit more heavily in that area just because it's a bigger industry. We're now up to around $67 trillion that OC and the SEC regulates in terms of investment advisors' assets under management, and that continues to grow as that industry grows. So with that, I'm going to skip to slide 4. There's the disclaimer, and then in terms of the regulatory regime of the SEC, Overall, the federal securities laws provide a robust regulatory regime to protect investors, maintain fair and orderly, efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. There's three forces at play to achieve this mission. One is regulation. It's the statutes as well as common law that drive the rules and regs that our market participants have to play in. The second prong is the examination side. And, as I talked about, the bulk of our resources and the bulk of our staff spend the most time examining investment advisors, mutual funds, and broker-dealers. And then finally, the third group is enforcement. And enforcement is responsible for investigating and enforcing the federal securities laws through litigation in administrative courts as well as our federal court system. Overall, in terms of examinations, because that's my background, I would like to just briefly talk about the nature of our examinations from a structure standpoint, so you all have a feel for how practically an exam works, and then that will help from an applicability standpoint of what we test. How an exam typically works for OC is we have a risk-based approach, which we will, and I'll be speaking on our risk-based approach and the importance of that at a later session. But what we end up doing is we select a registrant based on a number of risk factors, and based on our resources, we typically focus primarily on the highest risk entities to capitalize on what we feel is most important and to ensure efficiency and effectiveness of our exam program. Once we've selected a registrant that we want to examine, we typically open up that exam with a request letter and a phone call to the entity, letting them know that we're going to conduct an exam, and then that within that day we typically send over a document request. Some of our exams are broader than others. Some are very narrowly focused on one or two specific issues. It just depends on the nature of the firm and the nature of the exam that we're conducting. We end up, once we've sent over a document request, we receive documents back from a registrant, and we typically take those documents and review those for a number of weeks before we head out into the field and we do an on-site examination at the registrant. Our on-site exam process is typically spending a week or so, could be more, doing interviews of key, key officers, including the Chief Compliance Officer, which I'll talk a little bit more about this morning, at a registrant, and going through the documents and asking questions about the control and the compliance settings and atmosphere at the registrant and at the firm. That's oftentimes included in the minutes of the board meeting. We ask for those documentation from boards and from mutual funds to ensure that we see what's being given to the board in terms of the adequacy of the annual review, and that it's tailored towards the funds that the particular investment company is invested in and runs. So in terms of compliance challenges, I mentioned these on slide 10. Outsourcing. Here we see occasionally outsourced chief compliance officers. It may be a smaller firm that doesn't have the financial resources to dedicate a full-time CCO, or to have someone share those responsibilities, say like a combined CFO, CCO. So sometimes it may make sense for a firm to outsource that. There's pros with that in terms of that firm may get somebody more knowledgeable about the acts. But it's also, there could be some cons. We've seen challenges with that in terms of firm CCOs not being knowledgeable about the rules, not spending enough time at a particular registrant, and therefore not being familiar enough with the business to have tailored compliance policies and procedures. And one thing we do see is like if we find a problem or an inadequate CCO that is an outsourced CCO, we may, from a risk view, look to see what other firms that particular CCO is the CCO of, and initiate high-risk exams based on that information. Also, other challenges are problem compliance practices. Here, you know, tailoring the policies and procedures is very critical, as well as, you know, in a compliance environment, you know, making sure to determine how effectively the compliance program relates or maps to the unique risks and conflicts of interest in that individual firm. It's very key. In terms of compliance bureaucracies, here, you know, I think the important thing to remember is once something's identified, you want to fix it timely, you want to fix it appropriately, and you want to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And sometimes you may see compliance bureaucracies where compliance changes are so buried and mired in bureaucratic levels of review and systems that timely fixes of compliance issues are not performed, which can discourage the identification of problems there. And so, you know, ensuring that you have a streamlined, quick way that's efficient and effective to make revisions to your compliance policies and procedures and practices to ensure compliance with the law is very important. And then finally, compliance in the business lines. You know, I talked a lot about, you know, there may be differences in compliance in the headquarters versus the branch offices throughout, you know, the world, frankly. You know, it's important that testing is done around that, as well as the points that we make here. So with that, I conclude the presentation today. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions.